My name is Bob Tickleman. I'm a Principal Microsoft Technical Trainer. I'm excited to be your guide for Module 4, Exploring Azure App Service Deployment Slots. As part of the App Service plan, we've mentioned a number of other services throughout this learning path, and we're now going to focus specifically on this term called deployment slots. And on the screen, there's the one where they refer to them as staging slots. But deployment slots are going to provide this capability to now have your application through a variety of environments and easily move code from one environment to another. We're going to show you how you can actually set up slot values. We did that in another lesson earlier where we had recordings of showing you how to set conditions and certificates and credentials and connection strings at the different slots that you're dealing with. We're going to now show you how to swap those slots and some of the benefits of doing things like A/B testing and canary testing and being able to deploy applications very, very quickly and roll them back without the traditional install, uninstall, and reinstall processes that you might be familiar with. So the deployment slots are going to allow you to actually take a look at code in a stage that you're working with and then deploy that to a new staged environment by simply swapping the slots. And then if something ever goes wrong, it's easy to switch it back. And so you can take code from basically a test environment, go through all the values to validate it, and then deploy that into a new environment without having to go through the labors of uninstalling the new environment's old code, installing the new code, and having to have the outage windows you're dealing with. Literally swapping the slots is going to allow that code to appear in there. And if something goes wrong, you could literally just swap it back. It is referred to as hot swapping, or you're taking active code and deploying it into these environments. So we'll go through and show that to you. And I'll walk through, first of all, a whiteboard session, and then we'll go in and take a look at what that might look like in the graphical interface. In a previous recording, we talked about a microserviced environment where we had a front end, middle tier, and back end, just to go back and refresh you of that. Now we have, in this case, multiple applications. I've got 9 in the front end, my middle tier, and my back end. Each individual application performs a function for me that collectively makes the overall application that we're dealing with. So I've got some front-end user of engagement. It's got my web page. It's got my shopping carts that deal with some business tier or middle tier that you're dealing with that deals with my system of records in the back end. And so now we saw that in a previous recording that I could scale these independently, and that as a user comes to the website, and if I have a flood of users, I don't have to scale my back-end database until they start to use that back-end database. I can just scale that front end. Now what we're going to do is look at how we manage each of these various applications through the various environments. Now, when I go back into the graphical interface, remember the app service plan, which is what we're talking about, is the ability to have either 0 deployment slots, 5 deployment slots, or 20 deployment slots. So I'll go back and show that when we get into the graphical interface. So I've got my red triangle, my front-end website. We've got multiple versions of this. I got V21 running in production. I got V22 in staging, V23 in QA, V24 in test, and V25 in development. When it comes time to sign off on the code, V25 has finished its development. It's ready to move into test. Where in the past, I would have to uninstall V24 from the test environment. I would have to redeploy V25 in the test environment. I've got it both in the development environment that I have to install for the next set of development to take place. And if it wasn't working properly, I would have to uninstall V25 from test and then reinstall V24 to get it back. So that whole roll forward, roll back capability. What we now have with deployment slots is the ability just literally to swap the slots themselves. It's not actually swapping the code, it's swapping the URLs that access the code itself. And now what I have is, for all intents and purposes, while it's not redrawing it, what I now have is V24 in development, and I got V25 in test. It doesn't take time to spin it up. I don't have to install and reinstall. And with the swapping of the slots, remember the conditions that we talked about in another recording, it's now going to pick up the connections now to the new database, possibly where V24 was connecting to a test database. It's now going to connect to the right database for the environment that it's moving to. And if it fails, I just swap them back and I don't have to uninstall. So this whole process of swapping slots. The other thing that you'll see in the graphical interface, and this is often referred to as A/B testing. Let's say if I wanted to test two versions of something. So maybe in staging, I want to be able to actually test two versions to see, yeah, I got 22A and 22B, that I could deploy to two different slots, and I could say 50% of my traffic is going to go to the A and 50% of my traffic is going to go to B. So I can actually then get feedback from users before I pick which one I want to move into the production environment. So this incorporates a whole set of other services that are talked about in another course that we have that talks about the CI/CD pipeline and the different types of testing. But know that it will refer to, if you ever hear of canary testing and A/B testing and dark launching and feature flagging, all of these features are going to be incorporated through this capability. So I'm back in the graphical interface of Azure, and I'm now taking a look at my app service plan. And I've got an app that has been deployed to this app service plan. I've actually added 5 deployment slots for my dev, my QA, my staging, my testing, and my production slot itself. And so I could have different code coming to each of these deployment slots. So if I click on this, the application is actually the testing the application slot application. This is where I showed you the environmental variables and the configuration values, the app settings and connection strings. We're all going to be directed to this version of this application in this deployment slot. And what you're seeing here is the URL that would be used to access this application. So taking a look at the app service, the actual app itself in this deployment slot, I have the ability to swap this slot with any one of the other slots. So I'm currently in the dev slot, and I can swap this all the way to production. In my model, I would probably move it off into test. And now, just by simply selecting this, I can start the swap. And what it's now doing is taking, in my example, a V25 that was in dev, I can move it to the V24 slot, and those two are now switching. And so the code that was running in this application is now going to take on that new URL that you're working with to be able to manage that traffic. And it's already running in there. And if it doesn't work properly, I could literally just swap that back and then have it come back into the dev slot that you're working with. Now, taking a look at the deployment feature of the app service, I've got the deployment slots that I'm working with, and this is where I can actually shape the traffic. So you can now see that 100% of this traffic is potentially coming to the slot for the production version. Now, I could actually go through and change some of these slots. If I had a version where I could actually maybe have that A/B testing, I could now come through and shape the amount of traffic that is going to come to maybe my staging slot, maybe have staging 1 and staging 2 that I'm working with, that I could balance that traffic to. So I can manage all of this through the app service itself to be able to manage the versions of the applications and how do I move them through the model. Before I switch back to the slides, I want to show you that at the app service itself, it's in here that in the scaling up feature, where I have the app service plan, it's in here that I'm going to be able to get those staging slots. Remember, we call them deployment slots. This is the only place they call them. And again, I can have none at the free and the basic. I can have my 5 at the standard, and I can get up to 20 staging slots in my premium accounts that you're working with. So closing out the module, you can see that staging slots or deployment slots are available in the standard and premium plans or the isolated, depending on the plan that you're working with, gives you the number. And if you need more of them, you might have to move the plan up and then getting all the other features of more resources potentially that you're getting with that. You're seeing some of the features that we've talked about, that you can now actually swap the slots, that last line on the slide, without actually having to stage that environment. As I said, having an outage, removing the old code from that environment, deploying the new code, testing to make sure it's working properly, then making it available. You can literally swap the slots and or fall back by just swapping them back. This is just walking you through the 5 stages that I showed you of coming in and changing from one slot to the next. You can actually shape the traffic by monitoring how much traffic you want to go to a specific slot, but all of them allows you to manage the application, especially in a CI/CD pipeline and microservices where you have multiple versions. You might hear of environments like Netflix that were deploying 1,000 updates to their environment on a daily basis. The only way to do this was to have these applications, each individual small piece, moving through in an automated fashion, managing the services for you. So taking a look at the deployment slots, we have the features of you can configure auto swapping if you want. You can swap on preview. You can swap in custom warm-up. You can have certain conditions that will automatically manage this process for you. So it provides for a whole CI/CD integration and automation process you're working back. And I've already mentioned that rollback feature to be able to actually fall back in case that the deployment doesn't work properly. Here's that capability to shape traffic, to route a specific amount of traffic if you wanted to do that A/B testing. And when you take a look at that routing to production, that's typically done usually in a manual fashion where you want to make sure that you're just not swapping back, because what you could potentially have happen, remember that it's actually changing the old code back to it, what in this case would be staging. So I've got V22 in the staging, V21 in production. I swap them back. Now, what you might have a potential problem is if some other code moves into staging, you could actually lose the old code. So make sure that that move into production and the staging environment might need more controls around through than just automation. So we have an exercise that we're going to do this. We'll go out there now and we'll walk through the exercise for you.
The first portion of this exercise is going to be done in what is referred to as Cloud Shell, a command line environment that's available. And then I'm going to go back into the graphical portal to do the last part of the lab. We're going to go in and then, having deployed an app, I'm going to have 2 deployment slots and swap them back and forth. And I'll show you the web page that's been configured is significantly different. You'll see them change the position of the different slots. So let's get into this. We'll start off by creating and opening up Cloud Shell and initiating the bash environment. Once this starts up, I'm going to switch it over into a classic view just because some of the commands I'm going to use require the older view. The first command that I'm going to execute here is going to clone a Git repository that has a sample app repository in it. Next thing I'm going to do is create a resource group. The next thing is create an app service called web app. The cloned repository has a directory in it. I'm going to navigate to that directory. Now, using the AZ command, I'm going to deploy the web app with the values that we just created for the resource group and the web app. You're seeing that the SKU is a P0v3. So now that I've deployed those resources, I'm going to go into the resource and take a look at them. And so I've got my app service plan, and I've got my web app. Taking a look at the web app itself. So here's the URL for the web app. Let's take a look at what it contains, which is the website that we deployed to it. And you can see the simple words. Now, what I'm going to do is the next part of this is going to create a deployment slot. We're going to deploy another version of this website in there. And you'll see they're considerably different. And then we'll take a look at the URLs for the deployment for each. We'll come back. I'll leave this one up right now. I'll be using the Control F5, which is a way to do a hard reset of the web page to show you the new code. So let's go back. I'm back in the Cloud Shell. And I'm now going to deploy a staging slot named staging. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into the app service itself. And while this app service plan supports deployment slots, they're not there yet. So I'll get into under deployments. We'll see under deployment slots, there aren't any. And I'm going to now create one. So this command is going to create the deployment slot. So that worked. It took about 35 seconds, but I sped it up during the recording just so you didn't have to watch it. And I've refreshed the screen and you see it's gone from not having any deployment slots. I've got the 2 deployment slots, the production one and the one named staging that we just talked about. So what I'm now going to do is update some code and deploy it to the staging slot. We'll take a look at that. And so we'll have the 2 slots up here. We'll have the production slot and the new slot. And then I'm going to go through a swap process once it's been deployed. And I'll be doing that in the graphical interface. What you're looking now is the code we want to adjust. And I'm going to go in and change a header. So I'm going to change this header from the app services sample static HTML site. And I'm going to change it to the staging slot name. I'm going to save this and then quit. And this is going to deploy the new website to that deployment slot from the downloaded repository that I cloned earlier. Here's the code to deploy it to the staging slot. I can close down the Cloud Shell environment now. And I've got the 2 deployment slot for this web app. We saw that the production code had its URL from the default location, which was this site. What I'm now going to do is go into the deployment slot for staging, and we'll see that it has a different URL. The same web app name up front, but it has the appended -staging for the slot name. And if I click on this, you'll see a different website for the staging slot. And there's the static web page. So this was the standard production one as a static web page. And if I go to the one that had the staging URL, you can see that it's got the staging slot name, the one that I swapped the name for. Now what I'm going to do is swap those slots. I'm going to just use the swap feature. And I want to swap staging with production. I've got the message that those slots have been swapped. And what I can now do is the code that was in staging had the staging in its name, and the production slot was just the full name. Just to remind you of what they were, this was the staging slot, and it's got the staging in the word. And this was my production slot, and it just said the sample static HTML. Now what I've done is I've closed down both those pages, and we're going to go back and take a look at them. So I get the production website URL from the default domain of the overview of the web app. And you can now see this one's got the staging slot name in it. And if I go into the staging slot and its staging URL, if I click on this one, it should just have the static web page. That ends this exercise. Let's go back to the lesson.
Welcome back. We're going to close out this module on staging and swapping slots. So question number 1, what is the default routing rule applied to new deployment slots? You can pause the screen for a minute while you come up with an answer. So welcome back. By default, remember, a new slot has 0 routing to that slot itself. So that was the default routing value of 0. Question number 2, do all configuration elements follow the content across a swap? You can pause the screen. So welcome back. No, remember that configuration elements could be either values that must switch, that can switch, and some that must not switch. So by default, not all elements will come across a swap, but you can configure those 3 conditions: things that must be changed, things that cannot be changed, and things that can be changed. So those are the 3 options you're dealing with. So closing out the module, we've seen that the benefit of these deployment slots, sometimes called staging slots, provide the capability for automation and the migration of code from a development stage all the way through potentially to production that you're working with. It allows you to take a look at that hot swapping capabilities of taking running code without having to go through that traditional pattern of having outage windows and uninstalling code, reinstalling code or the new code, checking to make sure it's working, and then potentially rolling back if you have to. You know, all of that is easily managed using the deployment slot and the swapping capabilities. It introduces an easy way to do A/B testing by routing specific amounts of traffic to specific slots that you're working with. You can perform manual slots, or you can enable auto swapping to be part of that CI/CD pipeline that we've talked about. And then you can actually route that traffic, as I said, either manually or automatically, because each slot has its own URL, and you could manually switch people's activity to that slot, or it automatically switches when you do the swap of the slot. In addition to closing out Module 4, this is the closing out of the learning path number 1, where we took a look at the platform as a service offering of the app service plans. And the app service plan is the capability of having a regionally based set of resources, whether it be compute and memory, as well as feature sets, whether it be deployment slots and automatic backups. All of those features come with the app service plan. An app service plan would be like a tray. That tray you can have multiple meal boxes on. The meal boxes would be like your web app. So the web app is everything that you need for that meal, and you could put that on your tray, but maybe you want a drink that goes along with that. So you could put multiple apps into an app service plan, and then they're going to get the benefits of the app service plan resources, as well as features and capabilities. Now remember though, there is no way to do QoS or direct specific amounts of traffic to a specific app in an app service plan. Now the app itself is actually still your code that lives in a repository that gets deployed to the app service that lives in the app service plan. And those were all of those concepts. We've taken a look at scaling capabilities of scaling up and scaling down the app service plan to either give more resources or take resources away to get new feature sets like deployment slots and auto scaling. Or you can scale the plan in and scale out is now going to take instances of the applications in the app service plan and give you new groups of those app services within the region-based deployment of the app service plan that you're dealing with. We saw that there was configuration values that could come along with this. And we also took a look at the deployment slot capabilities. All great ways to manage modern application development, especially microservices in your modern application development model. Thanks very much for watching this recording, and I look forward to seeing you in a future recording.